Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something super complex but absolutely crucial, how climate change actually impacts our food. But we're not just looking at crop yields in a vacuum, though. We want to see how climate acts as this massive threat multiplier on a global food supply chain that's, honestly, already pretty fragile. To really get a grip on this, we're going to use South Africa as a sort of microcosm. See, they're a net exporter of food with a fantastic agro-processing sector, but they're getting hit hard by extreme climate shifts and infrastructure issues all at the same time. It is literally the perfect lens for us to see what happens when environmental shocks collide with industrial food systems.
But before we even bring climate change into the mix, we really need to establish our baseline. And I gotta tell you, the baseline is a bit of a shocker. Right off the bat, a staggering 45% of South Africa's available food supply is just wasted. We're talking about 10.3 million tons of perfectly edible food lost every single year. It never even reaches a human stomach. When a system is already leaking nearly half of its capacity on a normal, good day, any extra stress is going to be catastrophic. And this massive waste, it isn't just happening at your local grocery store or when you scrape plates into the trash. If we actually break down the data, the vast majority of this loss is heavily concentrated way earlier in the system. Like 68% of these losses happen in the early stages of agricultural production. Then you've got another huge bottleneck during the super vulnerable processing and packaging phases. Oh, and when we look at what is actually getting lost, cereals make up 50% of the total waste. Basically, this tells us the food system is incredibly leaky at the industrial level, long before it ever gets to us.
Now, the whole agro-processing value chain, it's intricate. It's really not just a straight line from the farm to your fork. It involves transporting raw materials, maintaining really strict temperature controls, hitting rigorous production timelines, packaging, and it gobbles up massive amounts of surface water and grid electricity. All of this complexity makes the whole chain incredibly fragile to external shocks. I mean, it's like a giant puzzle. If just one of these interconnected pieces goes missing or fails, the whole shebang can just grind to a total halt. All right, let's look at the first major disruption. Part 1. Climate shocks hit farms. The first domino. Extreme climate shocks are slamming into the very beginning of our agricultural chain, and the reality on the ground is pretty stark. South Africa is heating up fast. Actually, average temperatures down there are rising at twice the global rate. If we stay on our current global warming trajectory, projections are showing a potential 4 degrees Celsius increase by 2100. And guys, that's not just a slightly warmer summer. That is a fundamental, ground-up alteration of whether or not you can even grow food there. Heat at that extreme level messes with critical plant biology, tanks crop output, and severely compromises the health of livestock. And because everything is warming so rapidly, farms are getting caught in this wild climate whiplash between two devastating extremes. On one side, you have severe thermal stress just baking the crops and drying up the massive amounts of water needed for meat and dairy, especially in places like the Western Cape. But then, flip the coin, and you have incredibly intense storms and sudden flooding literally washing away infrastructure in regions like KwaZulu-Natal. It's this wild pendulum swinging from way too dry to way too wet, which makes reliable farming almost impossible.
Which brings us to the next falling domino. Part 2. The processing bottleneck, where raw materials halt. Look, when those farms inevitably see their yields drop or just fail completely, the processing plants down the line suddenly lose their raw materials. And we have to remember, these plants are massive energy hogs. Let's take something super simple, like a potato crisp. You'd be shocked at the amount of electrical and thermal energy, about 17.30 megajoules per kilogram to be exact, that it takes just to dry and fry those snacks. So when climate change disrupts the steady supply of raw potatoes, these giant energy-intensive factories end up running below capacity, which totally wrecks their economic viability. This intense reliance on resources actually leads us right into part 3, water and power failures. The invisible villains. See, climate change doesn't just wither up crops in a field. It actively attacks the very power grids and water supplies we absolutely need to run our modern food factories. It's a really nasty double-edged sword. At the exact same time that the agricultural materials are becoming less reliable, the energy and water required to actually process them become incredibly unstable too. And the weird thing is, the ways the grid fails are directly linked to these climate anomalies. We see these bizarre, almost ironic paradoxes.
For example, heavy floods create what's known as wet coal, which is practically useless for running industrial boilers. At the same time, extreme heat actually lowers the efficiency of power plant cooling systems. You combine that with intense storms physically ripping down power lines, and you're looking at catastrophic rolling power outages, hitting an industry that absolutely relies on continuous refrigeration and heating. Now, compounding that energy failure is a massive looming water crisis. South Africa is staring down a projected water deficit of 3.8 billion cubic meters by 2030. To put that into perspective, that is a mind-boggling shortage, and it's a direct threat to vital sectors like fruit and vegetable processing, which alone accounts for nearly half of the industry's entire water use. Think about it. You literally cannot wash, process, and produce those canned veggies sitting in your pantry without a massive, stable supply of clean water. So let's just take a step back and look at the whole board here. We're starting with a baseline of 45% food waste, adding in rapidly failing crops from extreme heat, throwing in broken power grids, and topping it off with a multi-billion cubic meter water shortage. Which obviously begs the ultimate question, what exactly happens when this entire system fractures? Well, here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. This isn't just about an empty shelf at the supermarket or paying a few extra bucks for bread. This is about societal stability. History shows us over and over, and studies of past global food price spikes completely backs this up, that when food supplies plummet and prices skyrocket because of climate events, it almost always acts as the tipping point for violent social unrest and socioeconomic collapse. Make no mistake, food security is national security. But it's not all doom and gloom. Let's move to part 4, the path to resilience, fixing the system. To survive this pressure test and prevent a total collapse, the industry desperately needs to adapt. And we actually have a clear step-by-step roadmap to get there. First off, we've got to conduct really granular regional climate risk analyses, because the flood risks in one province are a totally different beast than the drought risks in another. Second, food processors have to invest heavily in backup energy storage and off-grid generation so they can survive when the main grid goes down. And third, we need widespread adoption of precision agriculture to dramatically boost water and energy efficiency right at the source. On the ground, at the actual farm level, this adaptation looks incredibly cool. It means taking livestock waste and using it for biogas production to create these self-sustaining energy loops. It means applying biochar to degraded land to bring soil back to life and help it hold water. It's about a massive shift to conservation agriculture so we can sequester carbon while actively boosting our crop yields. And fundamentally, we've got to aggressively develop new climate-resistant crops and livestock that can actually thrive in this new hotter normal. In the end, South Africa is acting as both a powerful warning and a really solid blueprint for adaptation. Because the compounding climate, energy, and water crises they're dealing with today, those are the exact same challenges that are going to be knocking on every nation's door very soon. So I want to leave you with one final, really vital question to think about. Look closely at where your food comes from. Is your local food supply chain truly prepared for the impending heat? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.